My name is Bradley McKinney. I'm an aspiring cartoonist, and this is how I created my first comic book project, Forever Red, out now on WEBTOON. Forever Red is an indie comic book set in a neo-future Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that I've been working on for a while now. It's headlined by two main characters, Michelangelo McKinney and his uncle, Stephen the Steamroller. Michelangelo is granted powers, flipping his whole world upside down. As a result, him and his uncle embark on a new journey as vigilantes. But while I do want to talk all I can about Forever Red, this video is about why I made Forever Red and how I made Forever Red. So let's get into that. I guess this story starts with me at 19 years old. I was fresh out of high school and really starting to develop into my art skills and my understanding of what it means to just create and draw at a new level. I was a huge Spider-Man fan, still am, an actor in my best friend's stuff, and I really wanted to create something new. I wanted to create a world that, like I mentioned, I'm an actor, so I wanted to create a world, I could act in essentially, but for a comic book. And I wanted to do that with the world I built around me, meaning, people from my life, family members. But I also was seriously inspired by certain specific numbers of fiction and pop culture. And this is where I ran into a real crossroad with my art. At about 18, I started really taking my art serious from the kind of artist I used to be. Growing up, I was this really animated style, very Bruce Timm influenced, very Cartoon Network influenced style. A lot of stuff didn't really have, the anatomy didn't matter, perspectives didn't matter. It was more like cartooning. And on the other hand, the kind of penciler I was becoming, I was, very influenced by guys like Bagley, Jim Lee, Silvestri, Frank Miller. I could go down the line. I don't really need to name my influences, but that was kind of the crossroads. It was like I was wanting to get into something, penciling way more anatomically correct, way more larger in scale, crazy faces, crazy dimensions, crazy psychedelic stuff that like Barry Windsor Smith was doing on Weapon X. But I also wanted to tap into what guys like Eastman and Laird were doing with TMNT and just that world of like cartoony fun, something that could be adapted into an animated show, but also be a world about my life in a serious comic moment, in moments where it could get really Jim Lee Wolverine, but also, feel like Teen Titans, the animated show. Essentially, I think for myself, it's hard to pinpoint, but I was at a level where I was super amateur and wanting to pursue, an official pro career, but also trying to channel some of that cartooning I've always had. And something that it's what I say animated series for and always go back to is because that was my goal of Forever Red, as ludicrous as it sounds, is I wanted to make an animated property, something I could be passionate about. With all of this in mind, I got to the drawing board and made my first designs for Michelangelo and Steve. If I were to sum up how I went about creating my two protagonists, I would say it was definitely a process. It started off with the idea of I knew I wanted a dynamic duo leading my book. Obviously, I knew Michelangelo McKinney, who was this character kind of based off my grandfather with a boxing background. I already knew I wanted to do that. And I knew I wanted him to be a hyper-realization of someone I could be, a self-insert I could write about in my own comic book world. Next, when it came to creating Steve's character, I knew I wanted my uncle as my partner in this book, as my dynamic duo. And I was very much distinctively thinking of character visuals such as like Punisher and Daredevil or Cable and Cyclops, one guy who's very lean and agile, but the other guy is this brute force. Now, while the central story always has been Mikey McKinney in a world of superheroes and crazy events being guided by his uncle, the Steamroller, something I forgot to mention was the initial concept of Forever Red. I mean, before I had the name, before I had any pieces built together, was I watched this movie called Once Upon a Time in Mexico. And it wasn't right when I watched it, but it was probably a year after I watched it. And I was really getting into the character of Cyclops, reading his comics, kind of diving deeper into him. And I love Cyclops. I love Scott Summers. But I did always find that he was reduced down to, which he's way more than just the leader of the X-Men, but he was reduced down to a very one-dimensional role. There wasn't a lot of Cyclops books. He was never a main character, and he should have been. I really loved that power set. This is where I quote Once Upon a Time in Mexico as probably my biggest influence, or if not the biggest one, because thinking about what happens in that movie, and I was also tapping into like stories like Weapon X, going back in and really reading them, and just thinking about like, whoa, like what happens to Johnny Depp in that movie. If you've never seen it, it is a kind of a more niche movie. Is he's a spy who goes to this Weapon X like event through these villains, and they gauge out his eyes, and he fights the whole third act of the movie without his eyes. And I just thought it was the most badass thing. I love that visual, but my mind was somehow connecting that to what if that was Cyclops' origin? What if you took Wolverine and made him Cyclops? And I was just like, whoa. And then I started thinking about this is where the world building came in, but I knew I wanted that Frank Miller vibe of, like, I say Frank Miller because anytime Daredevil or Batman or any of them fought ninjas, it was that kind of vibe. Even TMNT fighting the Foot Clan was Frank Miller, and I knew I wanted that. I knew I wanted my own ninja clan, a headmaster. I took remnants of The Sopranos, making characters like Mafia, Furio and Tone. Those are the two big bad Mafia bosses in my book, directly taken from The Sopranos, so I won't lie to you on it. But then the other things just started to fall in line. When I knew I wanted that Frank Miller ninja-like thing, I was like, okay, I have to make this evil ninja clan who has this evil source of power, and they give Mikey his powers, granting him that Cyclops-like power. I also knew I wanted Steve to be without powers, but he has every weapon arsenal in the book. I just thought that was the coolest thing. That's where I really say, too, Daredevil and Punisher. One guy with superpowers, one guy with brute force. And from there, I just really expanded the lore. I took the Japanese symbol for fire and based that around my symbol for the evil villain ninja clan that I wanted to create, and for the headmaster villain, Don Pyro. You'll have to read the book if you really want to know a lot about him, I guess. Everything else, too, I ended up creating, a love interest for Michelangelo named Sapphire. I ended up creating this character named Arrival. But this is all stuff down the line that is still going to be in the book as I am actively making it. And I guess the final part of the story is when I came up with the name. It may have been, I can't really tell you when I pinpointed the name in creating all of this universe. A lot of this stuff, like I mentioned, was inspired from Power Rangers. Even the fire Japanese symbol. It was a symbol I drew all the time because I wanted to be Jade and Sheba growing up. I would just draw it on my coffee table at home. Like I mentioned through this whole video, I was just going through a huge renaissance of rediscovering all the things I loved. And Power Rangers being one of them, as one of the nights I'm making this, I'm drawing, and I end up getting to the episode of Power Rangers Forever Red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is my Red Ranger story. This is, Michelangelo's he's a superhero who's got remnants of Cyclops, remnants of Daredevil and Casey Jones in his outfit, but he's the story isn't about him becoming a superhero. It's more Red Ranger-like, and it clicked in my mind. I was like, even though Forever Red, it is kind of a risk, it's a very popular episode of Power Rangers, if not regarded as the best one, with a huge fandom. I was like, what if I took a play on that? What if I took a risk, and just the idea of, it made so much sense. Michelangelo, in my story, his life has changed and he becomes Forever Red. And to me, it just made all sense and it sounded like fire on all cylinders. With all this being said, I've rambled a lot about my creative aspirations. So thank you for listening to me. And what you can be expecting from me in the future is just Forever Red to be continuing, along with a few other art pieces I might put out. I'm always trying to stay working. Forever Red Book 1 is out right now, WEBTOON. You can go check it out. I'm just a dude who fails a handstand every now and then trying to work a farm and loves chilling with his little white chihuahua. Thank you for watching.